Ali is the photographer. Can you fix that one? It's nice to it's good. He's the biggest one. He's bigger than
Där Sally, alltså där går gränsen.
Alla är bakom mig.
Jag identifierar mig som en högtalare.
Får jag vara ditt stativ då?
Vi är helt överens om det. Alltså. Att när han, alltså när du tar första och sen precis.
Plats här inne, men jag syns inte. Ja, alltså jag kan ju... Jag får den. Yes. Nej, vi tappar. We have a camera also.
We can put microphone on the table, a small one.
I thought you said put your...
No. Okay. Alltså...
Har du gainat ner den där? Undrar om man kommer få hörsel.
Så du måste bara stå, jag tycker inte flytta.
Vi väntar alltså på kronprins Reza Pahlavi som ska hålla tal här i riksdagen framför invalda riksdagsledamöter och andra gäster. Vi har Charlie Weimers bland annat på plats och många fler.
هم میهنان گرامی فقط یک خواهش و اینه که کسی اجازه نداره بیسته، همه باید جا پیدا کنن و بنشینن به جز رسانه ها. برای همین خواهش میکنم همگی جا پیدا کنند. Otroligt viktigt att alla hittar ett sittplats som de kan sitta på, förutom media då, som gärna får stå. Men alla måste ta en sittplats.
Redan kris. Reza Pahlavi. Vem som har tagit glaset. Vem tog den?
Jag är försiktig för det. Vi går ner för det, då måste han ändra sin bländare. Så det vet ni. De håller på med att komma in. Säg till. English?
میفهم منظورتون. هر وقت که بیام میشه.
Ställer sig sitta kvar.
honorable members of Parliament, dear friends, we meet at a time when people of Iran continues to pay a heavy price for their longing for freedom. For more than 4 decades, Iran has been ruled by a theocratic dictatorship, a system where power does not rest with the people, but with a regime that systematically suppresses fundamental rights. A system where women are denied basic freedoms, where dissidence is met with imprisonment or worse, and where violence is used to silence those who dare to speak out. We have all seen the courage of the Iranian people. Women stand up for their dignity, young people demand a future, citizens risk everything for freedom. And we have all seen how the regime responds with repression, brutality, and fear. Yet, despite this, one thing is clear: the regime lacks legitimacy. Again, Iranian people have shown that they want something different. No tyranny, but democracy. Not oppression, but freedom. Not fear, but the rule of law. In this crucial moment, our guest today is seeking to outline a transition from dictatorship to a secular, democratic Iran, grounded in human rights and accountable governance, and where the future of Iran is determined by its people through free and fair elections. I also like to express my sincere appreciation to the parliamentarian groups of the Christian Democrats and the Sweden Democrats for making this event possible, as well as to the initiators, myself, Magnus Berntsson, Nima Alimpur, and Arin Karapet. And with those words, it's my great honor to welcome His Royal Highness Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi.
Good morning, everyone. Esteemed members of the Riksdag, ladies and gentlemen. I stand before you today not to speak of policy abstractions or diplomatic courtesies. I stand before you to speak of a people, a great, ancient, and proud people, who at mortal cost are fighting for freedom. What is unfolding across Iran is not simply a political dispute. It is not a contest between factions within a system. It is something far more elemental, a national reckoning between a civilization and a ruthless regime that has occupied it for nearly half a century. Since inception, the Islamic Republic has not behaved as a state among states. It has operated as a revolutionary enterprise, exporting instability through proxies, subverting its neighbors' sovereignty, fueling conflict from Baghdad to Beirut, from Sana'a to Damascus, and advancing its nuclear ambitions beneath a fog of denial. It has not sought a place in the community of nations. It has sought to overturn that community. Yet something irreversible has now changed inside Iran. The battle in my country today is not between reformers and hardliners. It is between occupation and liberation. It is a battle for the soul of a nation. What we are witnessing is not a fleeting protest movement. It is a generational revolt, the most profound uprising in Iran since 1979, uniting workers and students, women and minorities, professionals and poets, and yes, even elements within the state apparatus itself. Together, they have rendered their verdict. This regime has forfeited all legitimacy. Indeed, it is a revolt against the 1979 revolution itself. When legitimacy dies, power begins to crumble. The regime understands this, which is precisely why it silences voices, shuts down the internet, and turns weapons against unarmed citizens. And the cost has been heartbreaking, a cost that demands this noble chamber bear witness. Men and women are being slaughtered in the streets and in their homes. More than 40,000 Iranians were massacred in a single week. The regime's operatives hunted wounded protesters in hospitals and executed them in cold blood. Bodies were collected by dump trucks. Families were forced to search through rows of unmarked body bags. 40,000. The number is almost too large to comprehend, too abstract. It allows too many in the outside world to look at it like mere statistic. So let me tell you some of their names and stories. Consider Hamid Mahdavi, the 30-year-old firefighter from Mashhad, who spent his final moments carrying wounded protesters to safety, only to be shot dead by regime forces for the crime of saving lives. Think of Sina Kazemi, 22-year-old. He was in his final term of engineering school. He had a lifelong passion for music and technology. He chose to fight for his and his nation's dignity. He was looking forward. Security forces shot him in the back of the head. In Bushehr, nurse Mansoure Haydari and her husband, teacher Behruz Mansouri, were shot dead side by side while protesting peacefully. They left behind 2 young children, ages 8 and 10, a family destroyed for daring to dream of freedom. 28-year-old biotechnology student Negin Qadimi went out to protest despite her father's pleas. Mortally wounded, she died in his arms whispering, "Dad, I'm burning." A bright future stolen in a single night of terror. But the terror is not over. It continues every day. Access to the internet is still blocked. And while the people of Iran are disconnected from the world, the regime continues to kill. Today, the media speaks of a ceasefire. What ceasefire? There has been no ceasefire in the Islamic Republic's war on the people of Iran. At checkpoints that mark most every street, regime thugs and their imported terrorists harass, beat, and murder innocent Iranians. For those who cry of war and its costs, this is the war you should be speaking of. The Islamic Republic's war on my compatriots. That war that rages on every day, far from the headlines of your Western newspapers and the minds of your television producers. But they are not far from my mind. My brave compatriots continue to resist. Many stand with broken bodies, but unbreakable will. They would rather die standing than live kneeling, and so would I. Churchill understood such a people when he said that nations do not die when their soldiers fall. They die only when their spirits surrenders. I am here to tell you, Iran's spirit has not surrendered, and it never will. Despite its brutality, the Islamic Republic is closer to collapse today than at any point since 1979. And one fact is now beyond dispute. The Iranian people will never accept a repackaged version of this regime. Too much blood has been spilled. Too many graves have been dug. The demand is not for a kinder jailer. The demand is for freedom. There is a military dimension to these events that this chamber is watching closely, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I say to you, however the military operation currently on pause turns, whether it accelerates the Islamic Republic's fall or merely deepens the fractures within it, the outcome of Iran's revolution will not be determined by any force from the outside. It will be determined by the Iranian people themselves. The Lion and Sun Revolution, the uprising that the people of Iran ignited in January with their own blood and their own courage, cannot be extinguished by any regime calculation, any diplomatic maneuver, or any military result. The people started it, and the people will finish it. If the military operation pushes the Islamic Republic into the historical abyss where it belongs, we will be there, ready, organized, and determined to build what comes after. And if the regime survives the immediate storm, we will continue the revolution until it is complete. We began this journey, we will see it to its end. History has given us no other choice. When I look at Europe, I see ambivalence and a continued inability to see the reality of the streets of Iran. I am disappointed, yet not surprised, at the rush to engage this criminal regime. The regime has murdered tens of thousands of its own citizens. The regime is sponsoring terrorism on the streets of Europe, including in Sweden. The regime is threatening and blackmailing European governments with hostages and violence. The Europe I believe in is supposed to stand for human rights, democracy, and equality. It has been a proud record in previous struggles, fighting against apartheid in South Africa, supporting the solidarity movement in Poland, and now in backing Ukrainians in the fight for sovereignty. So why should Iran be different? Are Iranian human rights less important? Are their lives worth less? Perhaps to some, but not to us. Sadly, this is not new. For decades, Europe has appeased and emboldened this terrorist regime. It has been a policy that has helped this regime survive and kill its own people. I hope the Swedish government will press the European Union and other countries to stand with the people of Iran and their struggle for liberty. I am pleased and heartened that so many members of the Riksdag across multiple parties are here today to hear a message from the people of Iran. On behalf of my compatriots who are far too often silenced, I thank you. Esteemed members of the Riksdag, this is no longer distant geopolitics. It is a security emergency on Swedish soil. The Swedish Security Service, SAPO, together with the Swedish Police Authority, has confirmed that the Islamic Republic of Iran operates within Sweden through criminal proxy networks. These are not surveillance operations alone. They carry out acts of intimidation and violence targeting Jewish communities, Iranian dissidents, and Swedish citizens at large. On the 3rd of March this year, shortly after the outbreak of the current conflict in the Middle East, SAPO issued an urgent public warning of a heightened threat level. This is not speculation. This is a statement from your own security services. And here is what makes this particularly corrosive. The criminal networks that Tehran employs do not cease to exist between assignments. They are embedded in Swedish society. They are the same networks already identified as a major internal threat to public safety. Sweden has responded with resolve. You have restricted visas for Iranian embassy staff. You prosecuted Hamid Nouri for crimes against humanity under universal jurisdiction, setting a historic precedent. But it did not last. Sweden returned Nouri to Tehran, where he was given a hero's welcome by his fellow murderers. While he was allowed to return to boast of his crimes on state television, Dr. Ahmad Reza Jalili was forced to continue to suffer in the regime's torture chambers. It was 10 years ago that he was taken, and he is still captive. Decisions like this embolden the regime to take more hostages, to commit more crimes, and to further defy the world. A French senator told me a few months ago, our governments have become hostages to our hostages. But governments still have a choice whether to give in to blackmail or not. Václav Havel once said that the only genuine security in the world is a security rooted in truth. The truth is, as long as this regime remains in power, Sweden and the free world will not be safe. Why did Sweden join NATO? Because of Putin's wars of aggression against Ukraine. That decision was correct, and it was necessary. Let us not forget that the Islamic Republic is not a bystander to Russia's war. Tehran has supplied drones and missile technology to Moscow. Iranian manufactured weapons have struck Ukrainian cities. Regime technical cooperation has sustained Putin's capacity to wage war against a democratic neighbor. As President Zelensky and I have discussed and stated together, the Russian threat to Europe and the Islamic Republic's threat to Europe are not two separate problems. They are two manifestations of a single challenge. Sweden now stands inside NATO's collective defense. But collective defense is not only military, it is political, economic, and moral. It requires that democratic nations recognize threats in their totality and also recognize the Islamic Republic's support for Russian aggression as the direct security concern that it is. Let me now speak not of present dangers, but of future possibilities. The relationship between Sweden and Iran has deep roots. In the early decades of the 20th century, Swedish experts and businesses built strong ties with Iran. During the celebration of the 2,500 years of Iran's civilization at Persepolis, Sweden was represented by then Crown Prince Carl Gustaf. His Majesty and I were sitting right next to each other and spoke of the future of our nations and people. That future, with the democratic Iran, would change the security calculus of the entire region and of Europe. It would immediately dismantle the proxy networks operating on Swedish soil. It would end the hostage diplomacy that has poisoned relations with Western nations for decades. It would cooperate on intelligence and the rule of law. It would cease its support for Russia's war machine. It would secure Europe's energy needs for decades to come. It would emerge as a natural partner, a nation of 90 million people with extraordinary human capital, a rich civilization, and a desire to rebuild after decades of misrule. Sweden has every reason to be part of that future. Your excellence in information technology and digital infrastructure, your defense industry, Saab's world-class capacities in aerospace and defense, your engineering heritage through Volvo and Scania, your commitment to culture, your tradition of precision manufacturing and industrial innovation. These are all precisely what a rebuilding Iran will need. This is not charity. This is partnership between equals, between nations with complementary strengths and shared values. At this historic moment, as Iranians call upon me to help provide leadership towards a democratic transition, I reaffirm the commitment I have made through my life to serve as a unifying national figure, not a partisan one, not a claimant to power, but a facilitator of stability, of national unity, and of a peaceful transfer to democratic governance. I am not alone in believing this is possible. Together with economists, legal experts, security professionals, and civil society leaders from across the Iranian political spectrum, we have developed detailed transition frameworks, the Iran Prosperity Project, to ensure institutional continuity, prevent instability, and allow rapid national recovery after the regime's end. There is a plan, there is a path, there is a responsible alternative. Even within the state apparatus, the fractures are deepening. Reports indicate that members of the armed forces and security institutions are increasingly refusing orders to participate in violence against civilians. Many have quietly signaled where their true loyalty lies, with the nation, not with those who repress it. When the path emerges, I am confident they will act. No government can survive once it loses the willingness of its own institutions to enforce repression. We are approaching that moment. Let me conclude, esteemed members of the Riksdag, with what I believe is the simplest and most important truth of this address. The Iranian people are not asking you to fight their revolution. They are already risking their lives doing that themselves, with a courage that should humble all of us. They are asking something far more modest. Do not legitimize those who oppress them. Do not strengthen those who terrorize them. Protect those who have sought refuge among you, and prepare for the day when Iran stands free. There are moments in history when neutrality is not a position, it is a decision. When caution is not prudence, it is complicity. When history quietly presents a question and waits with terrible patience for an answer. Churchill faced such a moment in 1940. Václav Havel faced it in 1989. Zelensky faces it today. And in their own way, with no aircraft, no armies, no diplomatic immunity. The people of Iran face it in every street, every prison cell, and every unmarked grave. The Iranian people have already answered. They have answered in the streets and in their prisons. They have answered with their lives. They have chosen freedom. History now asks the democratic world a simple question, and Europe in particular. Will you stand with a free people, or will you accommodate those who oppress them? Future generations will not read your statements. They will assess your actions. They will not ask what you said. They will ask what you did and what you refused to do when it mattered. And one day soon, and I say this not as sentiment, but as strategic conviction, when Iran is free, when its people stand again among the free nations of the world, when its children inherit a country without fear, we will all know that this was the moment when history turned. The moment when a great people refused to kneel. The moment when free nations chose not to look away. Let it be written that when that day came, Sweden was ready. When the Iranian people stood for freedom, Sweden stood with them. Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Your Highness, for the great speech. And now the members of Parliament have an opportunity to pose their questions to His Highness Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. When you are posing your question, please state your name and party affiliation. So, Member of Parliament Rashid Farivar.
Rashid Farivar from Sweden Democrats. I start Farsi and English. با عرض درود و خیر مقدم حضور بزرگوار شاهزاده رضا پهلوی و همچنین تشکر صمیمانه از دیدار جناب عالی از پارلمان سوئد ریکستاگ. شاهزاده رضا پهلوی، شما بارها از کشورهای دنیا خواسته اید که به رژیم فاسد، جعلی و جنایتکار ایران فرصت بقا ندهند و به قولی طناب نجات برای آنها فراهم نکنند. Don't throw them a lifeline. و در عوض از مردم ایران پشتیبانی کنند و آنها را قربانی رژیم نکنند. Don't throw Iranian people under the bus. در شرایطی که بخش قابل توجهی از مردم ایران به ویژه ایرانیان ساکن اروپا عملکرد اکثر دولت‌های اروپایی را نوعی تسهیلگر بقای این حکومت تلقی می‌کنند، توصیه‌ها و راهکارهای مشخص شما برای مردم ایران و جامعه ایرانیان خارج از کشور به ویژه در اروپا و مشخصاً در سوئد چیست تا بتوانند به طور مؤثر در جهت تغییر این وضعیت اقدام کنند. May I read the English version, please? Thank you. With due respect and a warm welcome to His Excellency Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, and with sincere appreciation for your visit to the Swedish Parliament, Riksdagen, Your Excellency, you have repeatedly called on countries around the world not to grant the corrupt, illegitimate and criminal regime in Iran any opportunity for survival. In other words, not to throw them a lifeline. Instead, you have urged them to support the people of Iran and not to throw Iranian people under the bus. At a time when a significant portion of the Iranian population, particularly exiled Iranians in Europe, perceive the actions of many European governments as facilitating the survival of this regime, what are your specific recommendations and practical strategies for the people of Iran and for the Iranian diaspora in exile, especially in Europe and specifically in Sweden, to act effectively toward changing this situation? با تشکر. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Certainly, especially now that we have witnessed over a month of complete silence as a result of the total internet blockage and limited information coming out of Iran, to the extent that members of the diaspora can't transmit any message they receive from back home for the attention of the international community, whether it is government, media, or other instances, they play a critical role of maintaining that level of information to still come out. It shouldn't be anything new to the world by now, what this regime has done for decades. But the timing of the issue is so critical because we are now, in my view, facing an opportunity for ultimate change in the sense of a total collapse of the regime that has been severely weakened as a result of the recent military campaign. And if you notice, the ask of the Iranian people, whether at home or abroad, was help us equalize the playing field. So as defenseless citizen, rather than facing a brutal repressive reaction by the regime, we have an actual fair chance to claim back our streets and ultimately liberate the people. As I mentioned in my speech, we are the boots on the ground, we the people, but we need a little bit more support so that the moment the call to action comes, people are actually, within reason, much safer to take the streets into their own hands as opposed to face the regime thugs. Now, there are many different ways that the international community can respond. I know most countries will not get engaged in actual military conflict. That's not what we are asking, particularly Europe. But Europe can do many things at the same time. You can continue on the process that already started. It was not a minute too soon when you finally decided to prescribe the IRGC as a terrorist organization. As you know, this is something we've been calling for a long time. And many parliaments did agree to it, but many governments refused to decide it. I don't know how much of it had to do again with submitting to hostage blackmail, but at least it was finally done. You are beginning now to put more pressure on the diplomatic corps by limiting them or expelling them, including elements that are not being deported because having strong ties with the regime and the separatists. One thing that I can openly urge everyone, and what Europe in particular can, is to focus, number one, on the issue with the internet and access for information. Number two, call for a stop to executions in Iran, which is happening every single day, and do call for freeing all of the political prisoners in Iran. Whatever way it is, that should be the strongest ask and solidarity of the free world. Whether or not the regime implements it, at least you're sending a strong message to them and to the people of Iran that this is not subject to negotiation. This is a demand. This is a matter that this regime cannot dodge yet again. It's important in the equation, so this is one of the things that I'm sure the diaspora will heed, will call, and we hope we'll get a firm positive answer from both legislative side of various governments, and hopefully more courageous leaders in government will also decide that this is the time to finally call it for what it is and recognize that liberation is the ultimate campaign that is valid, necessary, and it is win-win in the sense that the people of Iran are liberated, but the world will finally be rid of all the threats that this regime has posed ever since its inception. This is the kind of timing that is critical while the momentum is going on, and these are the first elements that I will indicate will be part of what the diaspora could certainly do, but the kind of support we hope to obtain and the kind of measures that certainly Europe can take on this note. Thank you.
Okay, Member of Parliament from Finland, Peter Östman.
Yeah, Your Highness Reza Pahlavi, I'm Peter Östman, Chair of the Christian Democratic Parliamentary Group in the Finnish Parliament. After we met in Washington, D.C. at the Interparliamentary Security Conference in December, much has happened. We have seen how the current dictator regime has killed tens of thousands of demonstrants, and the war has been going on for a while. Since many politicians, especially within the left-wing bloc, as well as many journalists, doubt the possibility of a regime change, I had like to ask that, is your hope and your vision for a regime change still as strong as it was in December in Washington, D.C., or has it even grown stronger? And another question, many Iranians living in Finland are also waiting for a regime change in Iran. Would you consider visiting Finland if an invitation were extended? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Of course, look, I think it's not just me saying it, but many Iranians were heartened and encouraged by the degree of sacrifice and courage that millions of Iranians displayed inside Iran. For the past few months, every single week, there have been demonstrations in the four corners of the world by members of the diaspora in support of their fellow compatriots, demonstrating for various reasons and occasions almost every week, all over the place, including here in Sweden. That shows the level of commitment and belief we have in our struggle for liberty. As I said in my speech, we don't have the option to quit. We have to win. Hopefully, we'll do it quicker, at less human cost, by having the full support of the free democratic world. And as far as the invitation, absolutely, I'd be more than happy to visit Finland. Hopefully we won't have any foreign ministry blocking it. Hopefully don't have any hostages in Tehran. But I'm just saying it outside of kidding that unfortunately the regime has demonstrated that it has learned that it pays to take hostages and using them as leverage or human shields with our own population. This is a somber reminder of what we have to deal with, and I think we need to show the kind of strength that people of Iran on their end are willing to sacrifice life and limb. I hope that there's enough resolve and strength and moral conviction that today we hope democratic governments will back us up and not, give in to those kind of pressures that the regime will ultimately, of course, try to exercise to intimidate. But we need that, and in that light, I hope that I can carry on the message of millions of my compatriots to your government and your citizens, which is what I'm doing here and in the rest of countries here in Europe and around the world. Thank you, sir.
Member of Parliament, Mikael Oscarsson.
Thank you very much, and I want to, from the Swedish Parliament, say welcome to Sweden and thank you for standing so bold for the Iranian people. I want to ask you, how can Sweden take a lead to stand together with you and take a policy within the EU against the mullahs and for freedom in Iran? Can you conclude? You've been saying things, but can you conclude what can Sweden do to take a leading role to stand with you and with the Iranian people? Thank you.
Well, I mean, this is obviously the most critical shift in policy and vision and a diplomatic reset as to what hasn't worked, which is appeasement. And therefore, until when do we want to follow the same path, hoping to obtain a different result? This is the opportunity to say, look, we know who are our friends and we know who are our enemies. The Iranian people are your natural allies, but they are the first captive, they are the first hostage of a regime that has occupied us. When some people talk about war as an intervention, we look at it as a necessary act of liberation. I'm thinking of the French during the Second World War, when the Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. That was a moment they started feeling the end is near and we may get liberated. This intervention was to us an act of liberation, or at least equalizing the playing fields. But it needs to be carried out to the very end. This is not the kind of issue you will stop halfway. Why? Because now you have the regime at its weakest, but at its most dangerous. It's willing to take revenge. It will take its revenge, first and foremost against our own citizens, but also against anyone who dare them in the process. Which is why it's so critical that much more important than the price of a barrel of oil or midterm elections, what's at stake is this regime has to go. That's the only way to put away nuclear threat, belligerence, threatening commerce, continuing proxy wars, bringing terrorism on European soil, the Ukrainian war. Every aspect that you can think of is singularly packaged into one problem that continues to stand, and that's the Iranian regime in Tehran. We have the opportunity, when I say we, I mean a collective we, Iranians and the free world, to put an end to this madness. This is the quickest path, not only to assure that the threat is gone, but you also have a stable alternative that replaces it. People who, unlike this regime, want to work with you. People unlike this regime, share the same values of human rights and liberty and equality, and you find us as your natural partners. We are ready to act. We need a little bit more help, and this is the moment for more proactive action by governments. It's beyond issuing declarations, it's beyond issuing resolutions. It's time to act. And ultimately what will be the judge of all this is what kind of actions weakens the regime even more while simultaneously strengthen the Iranian people's ability to carry out the final fight. As I said in my speech, we are not counting from the outside world to liberate us in the sense of doing the war for us. People will rise again, and the time will come. But we need a little bit more done to ensure that when the call to action comes again, and for people to rise again to take over the country, there won't be a bunch of thugs that the regime is either importing from neighboring countries or have the ability to fund them so they can start shooting people on the streets again. That's really what is at stake in the calculation. I think it's a much quicker path to putting an end to the solution than worrying about blockading naval traffic or doing a whole bunch of other things. This is the quickest, least lethal way of dealing with the problem. Hopefully we can persuade governments that this is the kind of actions that will precipitate the regime's collapse in favor of both Iran once liberated, and I think after that, being a big sigh of relief for a lot of you that are concerned about the continuation of this situation.
Okay. Member of Parliament Jakob Risberg has a question.
Thank you. I'm Jacob Risberg from the Green Party, and thank you for your statement, Mr. Pahlavi. You spoke very much about the current terror regime, and I agree with a lot of things you said, but you didn't speak very much about the regime that came before that. So I would like to know, do you denounce or do you distance yourself from the way that your father ruled Iran, with hundreds or even thousands of opposition figures that were jailed and dissidents were persecuted and tortured by the Savak? Thank you.
Right. Well, first of all, a read on exactly what happened in terms of historical revision has already occurred in Iran. And I can invite you to talk directly to the people who at the time were arguing many points that today have had an evolution in thinking and assessment. So as far as the writing part of history is concerned, I would certainly encourage you to look a little bit deeper into what the read was. But having said that, I think the reason people respond to my call is because they have observed my track record for the past 46 years. They've seen what it is that I'm committed to, what is my vision of the future, and what I look to do for the next 50 years of our country is a look forward and not a look back. And in that way, if there's a distance, it's between what was and what we want to have. I think the best lesson is that you take the best that was done and discard the worst that happened as a means of learning through trial and error. But let me also tell you one thing. Today's Generation Z of Iran, are people who say that without knowing him, we love him, we appreciate him. Today, people in Iran are tattooing my father's autograph on their arms. People are chanting his name. Why? Because they know that whatever mistakes that happen, people make mistakes, but the intention was to serve the nation. Iran was progressing. Iran was liberating itself. And during the Cold War, we were examples of a country in the Middle East ahead of the curve with liberalizing women, giving people in society opportunities to prosper. Iran was on a path of progress. Iran had at the time 5 times the GDP of South Korea. Today it's half of that. And the reason is because Iran could have been the next South Korea of the Middle East had it not been for the revolution. Instead, we have become the North Korea of the Middle East. Now, irrespective of our political affiliation and viewpoint, Iranian secular Democrats from the left, middle, and right understand that the only way for Iran to survive and have political stability is through having an absolutely clear secular democratic alternative to this clerical regime. That's what unites us today. That's what puts yesterday enemies to be today's allies. In fact, I have broadened the scope of our national crusade for liberty by having the widest, most diverse example of Iranians working together, that have come together. Former enemies are today's allies, and I'm working with them directly. So this is representative of people who have been on both sides of the equation. Those who were with the regime before, those who were against the regime before. And today we're finding a common solution for our future. This is something that I urge you to be focused on. Not what people thought happened 50 years ago, but what we think now and what we are thinking for our future. And this is why we have appealing to world democratic societies to recognize the ability for Iranians to work together on a common agenda. And yes, when we disagree on things, that's why we want to have a ballot box. That's why we want to have free and fair elections. That's what will determine the will of the Iranian people. And my role in all this, as I said in my speech, is to make sure that the transitional government that I propose to lead will prepare the stage so we could have a constitutional assembly which will decide by means of people voting for, by means of several referendums, what kind of government they want to have, what will the future constitution be, and ultimately ratify that proposal in a referendum so we can have the election of our first new parliament and our first government of that future democracy. This is the path and the engagement that we have right now. So I urge all of you who are truly interested to make sure Iran gets to be a democratic country to help all of us who are today working together as Iranians to bring that about and help us through because of the experience you have, because of the tradition you have, and I'm sure you've discovered within our diaspora that a lot of people are committed to that, and there are people you can work with and reason with, and hopefully we'll have your support in that.
Okay, Member of Parliament Yusuf Aydin has a question.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for visiting and also for addressing us here in Riksdag. 2 questions. Once, you mentioned Iran being a proud civilization, and I did agree. And it has also a great desire, will, and also courage for liberty. The first part of my question is, how can the Western countries, European democratic, increase or strengthen the ability of the people so that they can do the change they need, especially also what you said previously. My second part is about the future. Myself, I'm from the Aramaic origin, from Middle East, also a civilization from that region. And we have seen that the regime, through its proxies, have brought a lot of devastation, chaos, instability to many neighboring countries, also affecting negatively many minorities living in the region. How is your view about both Iran and the region about having a more inclusive Iran with religious, ethnical minorities also as a part of the societies? Thank you.
When I traveled to Israel a couple years ago. One of the objectives was to bring about the symbolism of what Iran stood for 25 centuries ago, when the first declaration of human rights in practice was what Cyrus the Great did at the time when he liberated the slaves in Babylon and helped them rebuild their temples in Jerusalem. When you look back at the heritage of Iranians who are proud of their history and the fact that as the children of Cyrus, we turn around and tell that this is now Israel's chance to pay back the favor, the spirit of understanding the importance of an Iran where religious liberties will once again be observed and guaranteed. The rule of law, the Constitution will be protective of that. But it's not just a text, it's an actual, declaration of people's intent. Iran has been a natural nation state for centuries. Until the advent of this regime, I remember when I was growing up in Iran, I looked at everyone as a fellow Iranians. I didn't look at whether they were Azeris or Arabs or Kurds or Baluch or whether they were Christians or Muslims or Zoroastrians or Baha'i or Jewish. We were all Iranians. And keep that in mind, that the beginning of this regime started to bring the immediate aspect of discrimination. First victim were the women in Iran. And of course, shortly thereafter, we saw what this regime did to our minorities, whether ethnic, particularly religious, when the Jews had to flee, when the Baha'is had to flee. Today, one of the fastest growing religions in Iran is Christianity. And you know how much now Iranian priests are persecuted when they have to go and torture them and execute them and discover more than 1,000 underground churches. This whole demonstrates that this is a nation that is very diverse in terms of its cultural heritage. The only way that we can guarantee the equality of all citizens is to make sure that as citizens, regardless of their ethnic partners or religious faith, they have equal rights, and that's guaranteed by the law of land. And it can be implemented because, as I said, it's not just having it in the books. It's actually what Iranian people like to see each other back again at. The same kind of relationship, living together in peace side by side, can happen again and even better. And that's something that is not me saying it. I can guarantee you that this is the desire of 90 million Iranians who, once this regime is gone, can tell the whole world, unlike this regime, we love each other as brothers and sisters. Not just us among us as Iranians, but anybody who respects our sovereignty across the region. We have no problem working with the Arabs. We have no problem working with the Israelis. We have no problem to work with our neighbors. This is in our national interest to be able to be a country friendly and willing to work in peace with everybody on us. That's the Iran I'm talking about. That's the future we are all dreaming of, and it is quite achievable. If only we can first be liberated from this regime. That's why I keep saying, as long as this regime is in place, none of this will come true. But the minute this regime is gone, you will discover immediately the true face of Iran and Iranians.
Member of Parliament Marcus Wiesel has a question.
Well, first of all, warmly welcome, Your Highness, to Sweden and to the Swedish Parliament. And thank you so much for your tireless effort and struggle for the Iranian people. My name is Marcus Wiesel. I'm a member of the Sweden Democrats representing the people of Sweden, of course. And I do have a question regarding what mechanisms that you have in order to make sure that there are mechanisms in place in order to prevent the concentration of powers once the Islamic Republic is dismissed and once you've managed to give the freedom back to the Iranian people. Thank you.
Yes, this is a very good question because I think, look, separation of powers is obviously the most obvious ask. So the judiciary, the executive, the legislation, they have to be like a checks and balance system. In fact, as part of our transition plan, we already have created instances that are in some way already acting separate in that checks and balance system. We have the equivalence of what would be a temporary parliament that is forming. We have legislative, a judiciary part that is an independent panel of specialists in matters of law, transitional justice, that are looking into how to address those aspects. And of course, ultimately, the temporary executive team that acts as the government in transition to make sure of two things. Number one, to stabilize post-collapse the situation in the country, making sure that the most critical aspect of our governmental institutions continue to function. To draw a contrast to what happened in Iraq after the fall of Saddam Hussein, which was a complete mishandling and a disaster, we're looking to maintain as many of those instances intact. My position has been anyone who doesn't have their hand soiled with the blood of the Iranian people should survive regime change and be part of the solution, both in terms of the military and security forces as well as the civilian bureaucracy, that we need to make sure the country continues to be operated. While we prepare the grounds for the elections of the Constitutional Assembly, as I mentioned, when all the constitutional debates and the final form of the regime and the constitution will be worked on, all of that hopefully in a process that should not take more than 2 years to get done. So all of these are the focuses that we have, and each entity will play its own respective role in overseeing that process. Naturally, one thing that will be critical in all this time is how much the transitional government can, A, get the necessary support from the outside world. We're talking about unfreezing of assets. We're talking about removal of sanctions and all those elements that will facilitate the task of the transitional government to be able to do its job to bring about a very stable transition to that ultimate democratic conclusion.
Member of Parliament Magnus Jakobsson has a question.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you for a very strong speech about democracy and freedom. My name is Magnus Jakobsson. I'm from the Christian Democratic Party, and in my education, I'm a historian in Middle East and international relation. And I totally agree with your point about 1979. It was a catastrophe for all the Middle East, and it was a catastrophe for Iran. But I have also a question. As a politician, we will be working with politics, and we will be listening to what you have proved today, both in the European Parliament and in the Swedish Parliament. But you also was mentioned the relation with Ukraine. And we are a lot of people here in Sweden that have been supporting Ukraine, but we are doing it in two different ways. One is in the Parliament and also the civil society. And here is my question then. As a parliamentarian, of course, we have the parliamentarian work to do, but how do you see on the possibility that the Swedish civil society could in a different way be helping the Iranian people? Because Sweden have a very strong civil society, and we have showing that in the very big traveling with material to Ukraine and so on, and I have been very active in that. So my question is, how do you see how could we also strengthen the civil society and the civil relation between Sweden and Iran, just now, but also for the future? Thank you, sir.
Well, this is, of course, a very, very important point, and I think the obviously absence of communications with Iran makes it very difficult to directly access. But hopefully when this digital curfew is finally removed, because I doubt that this regime can forever shut down the internet, the manner the connectivity is reestablished, and I think with the help of the diaspora to identify the civil society actors within Iran, whether it is at university levels, whether it is activists, lawyers, doctors, whatever it is that constitute Iran's civil society, they have a very crucial role to play. As a matter of fact, and while we are on the subject, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that mobilizing the political opposition in Iran is not a matter of identifying groups or political structures that would currently exist, because they don't. That's what it's been very difficult for all of you looking at the Iranian political spectrum to see exactly what constitutes the opposition. I think the opposition manifests itself much more in exactly the point you said, that within various sectors of society and through our civil society, you'll be able to identify people who are maybe different viewpoints, but are more practically engaged with the streets, with the people on the ground. And through them, you'll be able to connect with elements that are more active in a political, organized sense. This regime has always created an element of asphyxia, which never allowed for Iranians to be able to organize themselves in terms of political structure. And while on the subject, as a matter of fact, since I'm talking to people in Parliament here in Sweden, one of the things that will be crucial is to help us while the transition is happening for the formation in structure of future Iranian political parties. Now, I understand that within the Iranian political spectrum, there are people of different persuasions, more conservative, more liberal, socialist, what have you. And again, it has nothing to do with the final form. Whether people opt for a republic as opposed to a parliamentary monarchy, that's a different subject. But we are doing all this so one day we can organize elections in Iran. If all of this is done, even with the best constitution, if we don't have the political parties ready to organize elections to form the future governments, then we still have failed. So while there's time to already think about it, one of the issues I wanted to propose to various governments and political parties is to work with us through workshops, through long-distance information, so Iranians, not that they don't know anything about it, but will be better served by having practical suggestions how to organize themselves under various party lines, whether it's the development of their charter, whether it is the means by which they can organize themselves. This will buy us a lot of crucial time so that our future political parties are ready to act immediately when they finally get the chance to form the future governments. That, in fact, is one way to engage us practically in terms of what will be helpful to Iranians to be organized politically to be able to tackle that experiment. So that's one of the things I'd be very interested to talk to parliamentarians and various political parties and put them in touch with whoever within the Iranian diaspora that are active outside, but those inside, so you can connect with them. Hopefully by then we'll have more of our political activists or political prisoners, for that matter, released, because they would like to be part of that equation. And so there's a lot of work to be done. We don't have to wait necessarily until this regime is gone before we start thinking about it, but that would be a good trend. That would be a meaningful way to engage with the Iranian people, to say beyond just showing solidarity in words, we are actually taking measures that are actually helpful. And we need a lot of help in that area. And this is one proposition I wanted to take the advantage of this opportunity to share with you. And hopefully other countries in Europe could also join in and help us out. So again, regardless of what angle of the political spectrum you represent as MPs or your political parties, I imagine Iran will probably be a multi-party system in the future. So again, regardless of which spectrum they are, work with our conservatives, work with our socialists, work with our people in the center. So this becomes a multi-partisan approach and not necessarily privy to one particular party. I think that will be a very healthy way to tackle the democratic challenge of Iran in the future. So I would welcome any help that any of you could do in that respect.
There is one last question from former Member of Parliament, Hanif Bali.
Thank you, Your Highness. This is maybe a specific question for the Swedish, especially during the medial coverage of this event, where my impression that the big change now compared to other uprisings and opposition works during previous years is that there's a new generation of Iranians, that doesn't have the carriage or the baggage of the revolution, the guilt of doing something wrong and trying to, as I look at my parents and their generation, the guilt of doing something wrong and actually failing in their revolution. And this has, of course, created different kind of sentiments throughout the years. One of those is isolation. The Iranian opposition has isolated themselves against other diaspora Iranians And for now, this is the first time I'm actually seeing people from the left and right, the children of those who made the revolution, actually kind of rally behind your flag. And one word keeps popping up in the Swedish media when describing your movement, and one is nostalgia, which is very strange because it's actually the other way around, how I see it, when the younger generation is actually more supportive of your movement, and the older, maybe failed leftists who saw the revolution being snatched from their hands, or even were naive in thinking that they could, vote for Islamic Republic and then it will be happy clappy democracy after that. So I would like you to, I would ask you to please respond to this idea of that medial pundits have here in Sweden, that the movement you have is fueled by nostalgia.
That's also a very good observation you just mentioned. And like anything, with the passage of time, people tend to evolve in their thinking or revising whatever it is that they thought right or wrong at a particular era. I've maintained contact with diverse group of people, including the opposition of yesteryear. As most recently, I had some meetings in Paris with former leftists. When I say former, because they say we are former leftists ourselves. They were member of the Tudeh party or were active in the Mujahideen Khalq organizations or Fedayan Khalq organizations and so on and so forth. And they said that whatever we thought at the time as Marxists or Leninists or Maoists, today we've come to the conclusion that that was the wrong thinking, that today we describe ourselves more in a liberal democratic discourse than the classic Marxist viewpoint, and the belligerence against the West and whatever it is that they called imperialism or whatever is beginning to fade in their minds, and they look at things a different way. All of this to say that, to be very honest with you, I think that we have a world where there are basically two categories of people. This is not just particular to Iran. I think it's all over the world. The first category are the people who still continue to be part of the problem. And it's very hard to even try to reason with them. They're just blocked in one thinking, unable to be willing to recognize in a realistic way that things are different and they may need to reconsider some of their thinking. And the second category are the people who want to be part of the solution. What I meant earlier about former enemies could be today's allies is precisely for that reason. And I've seen the kind of people who may have been completely on the other end of the spectrum 50 years ago, who now have completely shifted position. Whether it is observation of what was, what could be, whether some of it might be nostalgia, because when today's Gen Z looked at the picture of Iran of the 70s and the way Iran was like, as opposed to what it is now, that by itself, just a picture, tells 1,000 words. But it's also because they've been robbed of an opportunity and they want to regain their power. My struggle all these years was to do it by means of national reconciliation, as opposed to revenge. We are not here to retaliate in a vengeful way. We're here to call for national solidarity by means of national reconciliation. It is important because when you're working on such a massive national project, there's no time for bickering. There's no time to basically argue over past conflicts. We have to be able to bury the hatchet and move on. Now, this is something that I discovered in the demeanor of today's Gen Z in Iran, but also their demands. They're saying two things. A, we're not hostage to our parents. We want to have our own say in all this. So we don't want to inherit their mess. That's how we detach ourselves from the past. And at the same time, they say, whoever wants us to succeed as your children, as your next generation, don't dictate us what's good for us. Allow us the freedom to choose for ourselves. Because we've learned to do our own due diligence, we've learned to go and study for ourselves rather than to be brainwashed into thinking something, which is what happened to their parents and their generation who were part of the 1979 revolution. And that's where things begin to change. And I think that's exactly what in practice we learn every day engaging with today's generation. And I remember some of the parents who felt culpable for having done what they did. And some of them told me very bluntly that, we should be damned by today's generation. And I always tell them, it's never too late. Because whatever lessons you've learned, pass it on to the next generation. So they don't make the same mistakes some of you did. Be the wisdom of carrying on your experiences so history doesn't repeat itself yet again. So everybody can be involved. And this is in the spirit of national reconciliation that I'm talking to everyone to say whatever you did before, what's important is what you're willing to do now. This is our agenda. This is our future. Whoever can help, then help. And I think you will find that this is the only thing that will resonate with today's generation, but leave them with the ability to choose for themselves, as opposed to be dictated to an alternative that is not their own free choice. That's really the purpose of this conversation, these engagements, this campaign, so that ultimately Iranians will be able to know that the only measure to determine what the majority wants is the ballot box, but we need to get there first. That's our common path to freedom, and that's exactly what we're doing in practice. And hopefully we'll be able to work with people in the world that are willing to help us in that process. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It has been an honor to invite you to the Swedish Parliament. I, with my colleague from the Sweden Democrats, Nima Gholam-Alipur, and Magnus Berntsson from the Christ Democrats, we were planning in silence. And we were going to all these protests. I know they are standing now in the King's Garden. Tens of thousands of Iranians. My mom was one of them who lost her liberty during the revolution. And my mother is here. And since I was born, and it's good for the media to know that there are also Christian recognized minorities in Iran. I belong to one of them. I am Armenian from Iran. I'm born in Sweden, but I'm very proud of my Armenian heritage from Iran, because we have lived there for 700 years. One of the most oldest Armenian churches are in Iran. The same way my colleague Yusuf Aydin, who is Aramaic, which we call Assyrian or Chaldean in Iran, which is also a recognized minority in Iran. But I also want to thank my colleagues, our members of European Parliament, especially Charlie Weimers, who introduced me to you 2023. And I said, the Crown Prince of Iran is the only game changer. I want to say thank you to the staff. I want to say thank you to everybody in Kungsträdgården, the King's Garden. We promised you, we did this together. The Crown Prince is here. I want to thank the staff and to the young people of Iran. And I told media during my interviews, imagine if 30,000 Swedes were killed in one night when they shut down internet. And the rest of us who wakes up 9th of January, what would we think And what did we want the world to do? Before we criticize this movement, because this movement is the people's revolution, the Iranian youth, more than the half of the majority of Iranian population, haven't seen anything else than the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they're paying the biggest price with their lives because their parents, their generation, made the biggest mistake ever. And now it's up to us, who really stands up for the free world and our value, to stand with the Iranian people. And Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, I will tell this in front of the media, you're the only one who can lead a transition government to a democratic, secular, and non-Islamic Iran. Javid Shah. Thank you.
Vad heter du?